Primary care doctor.
Yeah, you play in the kick it when you don't get it.
No, what happened?
It depends on.
Hey, you got 25 bucks.
You lost control.
Close enough, is it okay?
There's another place you start before the primary care.
Yeah. In the pros, the kid is a speed, then it's like
If you stay for 500 minutes, when I got him on the
Fair decision.
you had no golf people watching.
Oh,
Did you get a vote?
the clock's a minute behind. Well, good evening. Glad you could all be here this evening.
His pregame speech. Oh, was.
We're all waiting.
I can
for the
wait.
Pregame speech. I mean, you go ahead.
He's ready to go. He's a gamer. He's ready to kick it off.
I'll just hold the football for you. Run up here and kick it. David, can I ask you to please some word of prayer?
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day that you blessed us with. We thank you for the nice weather and for all things that we have to enjoy in your creation. We thank you for being the awesome God that you are. We pray that you be with us tonight as we study and more of your word. Help us to be more of your will. Just pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Kenny, I had a good visit today, and this is encouragement, okay?
Okay.
Many of you know Roy Burt, Carl Middleton's dad.
Okay.
96 years young. He is now at Bellevue. They're working on a few things with therapy. But if you want to smile, go see Roy. You can't be overjoyed as much as what it is to see this 96-year-old who is alert and ready to go. But it was a good visit, and he loves the company. And Carla usually stays there with him, but he'll be there for about the next 20 days as he gets into all of the physical therapy that he has to go through. Great visit.
Yeah.
What a moment of joy, of encouragement today.
Good news. Glad to hear it. Anyone else have anything? No? It's funny that my background is in aviation, and in the book, he has several stories that are kind of aviation related, and I thought, well, isn't that interesting that stuff comes up? And again, a story in the chapter this week, he starts off with, there was a Ann Landers column in August of 1981, and it happened to be an airline pilot that wrote a letter to Ann Landers. And he was diagnosed with a brain cancer. And they told him, you got about a 50-50 chance of surviving the next 5 years. A little bit of hope, but not a whole lot of hope. And his co-workers found out about it. Of course, he had to go through chemo and radiation therapy. But his co-workers started a letter writing campaign. It just spread through the airline, and he told everybody, these two guys, they were telling everybody in the airline, send this guy a letter, drop him a card, just send him something. And so every day he's getting stacks and stacks of encouraging notes from the people that some of them he worked with, some of them, flight attendants or something. He just saw them just briefly, not had much interaction with them, but he's getting all these encouraging notes from all these people that just really lifted his spirits. And he was talking about all the people that he had to work with in the radiation lab and stuff, and all the TLC, they were so positive and upbeat and had a smile on their face, and they were just happy to see him all the time. And it just made him feel so good. He said, that positive impact on him boosted his spirits, but also all this mail that he was getting was boosting his spirits. They even had a fundraiser and sent his whole family on a Disney vacation, all expense paid. So some time to get away and relax and forget about everything. And so today he is considered a cancer survivor. And doctors were talking about it, and they said more than the chemotherapy and the radiation therapy that you went through, they said your friend therapy probably had more to do with your cure than what the doctors were giving him. Friend therapy, wow, what a way to describe encouragement. Somebody that will go that extra mile, do things for you, help you out whenever they can. You remember our definition way back a month ago when we started the class talking about encouragement? We said it's the act of inspiring others with a renewed courage, a renewed spirit, and renewed hope. We're inspiring them to continue on, pressing on. And that's exactly what this pilot was getting through all of his friends. They were helping him out. Okay, my advertisement for this week. Friendship Factor. Did anybody ever read this? No one? Really? It was pretty popular. It was written in 1979, and so here's what it says about the book. At the heart of each relationship is a friendship factor, the essential ingredient of warmth and caring, with captivating case histories and anecdotes about such famous people as George Burns, Howard Hughes, and C.S. Lewis. McGinnis shares the secret of how to love and how to be loved. There were over 20 million copies of this book sold. It was translated into 20 different languages. It was an international bestseller. So it was, I had a copy of it at one time. I looked for it, but I couldn't put my hands on it. All right. Back to friendship. Friendship therapy. 2 is better than 1. You've heard that expression, right? 2 heads are better than 1. Where did it come from? What was the origin? There you go. It was in Proverbs. That's what it came back to. It's considered a common proverb, but that it actually came from Ecclesiastes. 2 people are better than 1 because they can reap more benefit from their labor. For if they fall, one will help his companion up. But pity the person who falls down and has no one to help him up. God has called us to practice this friendship therapy. We are to support one another and help each other and lift each other up and encourage each other as we go along. The phrase one another. How often do you hear that? How many times is in the New Testament? A lot. It actually appears over 100 times in the New Testament, right at 100 times. But most of those times they were, they said to one another. They were discussing with one another. That's what most of them are. But then there are some other examples. John 13:14, Jesus has just washed the disciples' feet. If then your Lord and teacher have washed your feet, you too ought to wash one another's feet. So there's 15 times that it's related to encouragement, to serve one another, love one another, help one another in various ways. John 13:34 and verse 35, John 15, verse 12 and verse 17, Romans 13:8 says to love one another. By this people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another. Build up one another, Romans 14:19. Instruct one another, Romans 15:14. Greet one another with a holy kiss. No, we're not doing that. There's a lot of people though that come up that when we're at the door greeting, they come up and they put their cheek out. They want to be greeted with a kiss on the cheek. So some people like to do that, but it's 3 times in the Bible: Romans 16:16, 1 Corinthians 16:20, and 2 Corinthians 13:12. Serve one another, Galatians 5:13. Also in Galatians 6:2, bear one another's burdens. So 15 times there's an instruction to encourage one another in some way. Be kind to one another. Forgive one another. The specific encourage one another 5 times. Be a friend to one another. That's what it's all about. All right, jumping back to the Old Testament. Oops, pushed the wrong button. 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 1 through 5. When David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan and David became bound together in close friendship. Jonathan loved David as much as he did his own life. Saul retained David on that day and did not allow him to return to his father's house. Jonathan made a covenant with David, for he loved him as much as he did his own life. Jonathan took off his robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with the rest of his gear, including his sword, his bow, and even his belt. On every mission on which Saul sent him, David achieved success, so Saul appointed him over the men of war. This pleased not only the army, but also Saul's servants. So David is gaining favor with everyone except Saul. We talked about that last week. Saul just gets jealous of David. The more success David has, the more jealous Saul becomes. And he just looking at this from a father's standpoint, Saul dreams of a future where Jonathan is going to be the next king. But we know that David is going to be the next king. He's already been anointed. And I just wonder if Saul found that out. Did he ever learn that Samuel had already gone down and anointed David? I don't know. Did people talk about it? Or did they really keep it a secret? Don't know. Close call later on in the chapter, verse 10. The next day, a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul hurled the spear. He thought, I will pin David to the wall, but David evaded him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. Sad story. Dropping down to verse 14. David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw he had great success, he stood in fearful awe of him. It's interesting that this version says that he had awe of him. He wasn't just fearful. He wasn't afraid of him. He had respect for him. So they're going to test the waters. Chapter 19. Saul spoke to Jonathan, his son, and to all his servants that they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. And Jonathan told David, Saul, my father, seeks to kill you. Therefore, be on your guard in the morning. Stay in a secret place and hide yourself. And I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are. And I will speak to my father about you. And if I learn anything, I will tell you. So they've got this agreement. They're bosom buddies. So Jonathan kind of calms Saul down, and using logic, Jonathan is explaining to Saul that David has risked his life for him. The things that David is getting popular for, he did those things for you. He went and faced Goliath for you. He wasn't doing it for glory or honor. He was doing it because this guy was making threats against the army of God. So Saul agrees not to kill David. I just wonder if he had his hand behind his back and his fingers crossed when he. Verse 9, then a harmful spirit from the Lord came upon Saul as he sat in his house and his spear in his hand, and David was playing the lyre. Saul sought to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he eluded Saul, so that he struck the spear into the wall, and David fled and escaped that night. So then David calls in sick. He's not going to go up and be in the same room with Saul. He's tried to kill me 3 times already. Verse 15, then Saul sent messengers to see David, saying, bring him to me in the bed, that I may kill him. If he's really sick, just bring bed and all. Bring it down here, because I want to kill him. So we're going to leave that, but we'll come back to it. Jonathan loved David. He cared for David. He would do anything for him. He gave him the shirt off his back. He gave him his weapons, his sword, his bow and arrows. And then he warns David with arrows. He goes out to practice his archery and takes a little boy with him, and is going to have the little boy go chase the arrows. And so he's shooting the arrows, and so he had a coded message. They agreed to do this. And he tells them, oh, they're beyond you, to go further and hurry. He's sending a message to David telling him to flee, get away, because yes, Dad still wants to kill you. So the little boy comes back, and he gives, Jonathan gives the little servant boy his bow and said, take him back to the house, I'll be along shortly. And so then, verse 41, as soon as the boy had gone, David rose from beside the stone heap and fell on his face to the ground and bowed 3 times. And they kissed one another and wept with one another, David weeping the most. Do y'all have a friend like that? No? We're to encourage one another. It's our job. It's not Mel's job or Tim's job or Wayne's job. It's not something we pin on the leadership. It's each Christian's responsibility. We're to encourage one another. So, all of the words that you're going to see on this page that are highlighted in yellow are imperative words. They're commands, orders, if you're in the military. 1 Thessalonians 4:18, therefore encourage one another with these words. 1 Thessalonians 5:11, therefore encourage one another and build up one another. Build one another up as you are doing. 1 Thessalonians 5:14, there was 4 imperatives in this. We urge you, brothers, admonish the idle, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient with them all. Encourage the faint-hearted. And then the Hebrew writer in 3:13, but exhort one another every day as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. That word exhort comes from the kaleo that's translated encourage. But like I said a few weeks ago, there's only about 10 to 20 times in the Bible that the word actually got translated encourage. It's usually exhort, beg, invite. There's other words that it uses. Also in Hebrews 10:25, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. That word encouraging is actually, it's a present active. It's something that you're doing, and you're expected to continue to keep on doing that. Encouragement, I already said, it's our ministry. It's our job. It's what we're supposed to be doing in the first place. Directed to every Christian, not to the staff, not to the leaders, not to the deacons. This is a quote that David Jeremiah had in the book. He didn't didn't have the source. He just said, I really like that's what somebody said, that pouring courage into someone who needs it. Whoops. Couple of taps there. We're all different. We all give and receive encouragement in different ways. What do you find encouraging? What really encourages you? What boosts you up?
Kind words.
Kind words. Compliment.
Sometimes when people go out of their way, just do it because you know they love you. It's appreciated that way.
Yeah. Going to visit somebody at the at the nursing home or yeah. This past Sunday I went to see the Rainies, and he was so excited, and he said, we really appreciate the way you take care of us, brother. So I mean, and it's funny, if there's ever anything I can do for you. Now, this is both he and his wife are bedfast. And it's not like they're going to, I don't know how they're going to be able to help, but they sure would like to find a way that they could help. So what pours encouragement into your soul? What really lifts your spirit? I think probably the most encouragement I ever had was when I baptized my kids. I got lots of head nods. Yeah, that really boosts your spirit. Makes you feel great. Well, let's talk about Job for a second. Job and his 3 friends. Job 2 and verse 11. Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that had come upon him, they came each from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. They made an appointment together to come and show him sympathy and comfort him. Now, I just assumed everyone was familiar with the story. If you're not familiar, Job, a servant shows up and says, your kids were all eating at the same house, and it fell down on them and it killed them all. And another servant showed up, and your herds of camels were all stolen. And then another servant comes up, and just one tragedy after another, and everything is just wiped out. Everything in his life was gone. So he's got these 3 friends that they're going to go try and console him. They're going to comfort him through this time of sorrow. Chapter 2, verse 13. And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. No one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. But he knew why they were there. And just his presence, just the 3 friends coming to see him, taking a week off of work to come sit with him and to be available. Hey, if you want to talk, we're here. But then they had to open their mouths. They were giving focused attention. They came for a reason, and they just came to make him feel better, to help him out, help him through his time of sorrow. Their encouragement at this point was sensed. We're going to leave them right there, and we're going to let those 3 friends be good guys for now. Well, let's go to the New Testament. Mary and Martha. Mary and Martha, Jesus comes to visit. Now, as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village. A woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. So far, so good, right? Listening to his teaching. She's got focused attention. Hanging on every word, listening to this. How does that make Martha feel? Well, this is how Martha felt. Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went up to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me. She's not doing anything. She's just sitting there. Tell her to get up and help me. There's dishes to be washed. She's not happy with the choices Mary made. But the Lord answered, Martha, Martha, you're anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. The point of this is sometimes encouragement is something that we hear. So with Job, it was something that was just sensed initially. And so here Mary is listening. She's focused on what Jesus has to say. Going back up to verse 38, as far as the village, John 11:1 tells us that it was Bethany. And Bethany is an interesting study. In Matthew 26 and verse 6, it says that Simon the leper owned a house or had a home in Bethany. Well, where was Bethany? We're from Jerusalem. It's not just down the street at 50th or...
Back to the west.
It was what?
I think it's back to the west.
It was just southeast, actually. From the temple, if you look across the valley, and here's the Mount of Olives, just across the valley. Well, Bethany is just over the hill, the crest of the hill there, so that it's out of sight from the temple. And it's really only about 2 miles away. It's not that far. But Simon the leper owned a house there. Well, for years I had this impression that once you had leprosy, I didn't think they could even own property for some reason. Don't know why. Part of it was that if you go back to the Old Testament, they were expelled from the camp. They had to stay out of the camp. They couldn't come into a walled city. Bethany's just a little village. It doesn't have a wall, so it's suitable for people who have leprosy. And the thing that's interesting about that, a lot of times when Jesus would come to Jerusalem, he would go out to Bethany. So the scribes and the Pharisees, they're not going to follow him out there and risk becoming unclean, because if you touch something that a leper's touched, then you're unclean. And it's time for the festival. We can't enjoy the festival if we're unclean. So Jesus could go out and have some peace and quiet if it really was a leper village. Lots of laws about leprosy in Leviticus chapters 13 and 14 about having to go show yourself to the priest, and then you stay outside the camp for 7 days, and then you go back and show yourself to the priest, and he determines whether or not you're clean or unclean. They must remain outside the camp, though. You couldn't come in. Who in the Bible had leprosy? Naaman was one. How about Moses' sister? Miriam. Miriam was struck with leprosy, and she had to stay outside the camp for a week before they could move on. King Uzziah in 2 Chronicles 26. Naaman comes and is wanting the king of Israel to heal his leprosy. He's asking for a miracle. I can't do that. And so anyway, it's interesting. I saw a photo of, not a shrine, a preserved house outside of Damascus that they say was actually Naaman's residence while he had leprosy. He was having to stay outside of their community. It was viewed as a punishment from God. You've got leprosy because you've done something wrong. You've offended God, you've made him mad, so you've got leprosy. I already said they couldn't live within a walled town, but they had to be in an open village. They had to tear their clothes. It was a sign of grief that they'd lost a loved one. And so they had to have torn clothes. They'd rip the mantle of the clothes, and they were lamenting their own death. It was as if they had died. If somebody was pronounced with leprosy, the family like mourned them like they were already dead, even though they weren't dead yet. Uh-oh, I don't think I animated all of this next slide. It doesn't look like, they had these sticks, bats, and this was noisemakers. And this picture was actually from something that was like during the Dark Ages. I don't know that this was something that they had to do. Of course, during first century, not only did they have their clothes torn, but they would have to hold their mantle up and cover their face and yell that they were unclean, warn people as they came close to them, unclean, unclean, so they would stay away. And so in the Dark Ages, they were using these little slappers, they called them, and they'd slap it against their leg or on their hand or something. It's just something so that people could hear there's a sick person coming our way. Restrictions on lepers. According to the Talmud, they had to stay at least 6 feet away from another person. I'm going, wait, is that why COVID said we had to stay 6 feet away? Did they get that from the Talmud? You had to stay 150 feet away if it was windy. They had some funny ideas. They thought if you could smell them, you were going to get their disease. So they thought it was an airborne type thing, and so that's why they had those restrictions. Lepers had to stay 16 feet away from another house. In the Mishnah, which is some of the writings of the teachings that they had to go along with the Talmud, they said, of course, anything that a leper touched was unclean, and anything that touched a leper was unclean. It was like touching a dead person. If somebody wanted to make a donation to them, wanted to help them out, they would just have to drop it on the ground and walk away and let the leper come get it. I saw one story that indicated they had like not a 2x4, anyway, had like a board with a bowl attached to it. And they would stick that out so that they could put a donation in the bowl rather than them having to scrounge in the dirt to pick it up. Luke 2:52. While Jesus was in one of the towns, a man came to him who was covered with leprosy. Luke is so descriptive a lot of times. He tells things the other gospel writers do not. He's covered with leprosy. Had to be pretty gross. We had a new supervisor at work one time. He came in and I go up to meet him. He has a horrible case of psoriasis. And I mean, his skin just looked scaly. And after I shook his hand, I felt like I needed to go wash my hands. And I said, "Do you have leprosy?" He said, "No." He said, "It's just psoriasis." And then another funny story real quick. Sorry. As Rodney can testify, we're very restricted as far as any medications we take. If we had a new medicine that was prescribed to us, we had to call the flight surgeon, and the flight surgeon would determine whether or not we could work, if we were taking this medication. And then they came out with a chart saying, well, if you take this, you have to take so many days off. You take 3 days off here. And so it's like, oh, can't work today. I had to take some. But we had the employee come in and he gave the supervisor his medication so he could call the flight surgeon and check on it. And the flight surgeon said, "Does he have leprosy?" I said, "No, they prescribed it for a spider bite. He got bit by a fiddleback and he had a big dead spot on his back that was spreading." And so they gave him this medicine. They said, "Well, the medicine he's taking is for leprosy." So he can work if he has a spider bite, but if he has leprosy, he can't work. Oh, goodness.
This is very much still a thing in like a lot of third world countries too. Ricky's church in India, Ricky's Dream Church in India supports a leper colony just outside of the town that they work with very closely. Where it's a group of about 40 to 50 people, well, of leprosy, and they kind of just have to be almost self-sufficient,
Mhm.
and they end up relying a lot on the church out there to be able to provide for them.
And I did some research as far as within the United States, there is actually, it's really slim, really small amount. They said they had 180 new cases 2 years ago, and then last year they had 159 new cases of leprosy, and most of them were in Florida. So, not sure why that is. Okay, so this guy, back to Luke 5 and 12, this guy is covered with leprosy. When he saw Jesus, he bowed down with his face to the ground and begged him, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." The phrase that he uses it's very confident, and he's using a logical argument, and he says, "I know you are able, you can make me clean." But then Jesus uses the same words, a different form of the word, and in his response, and he said, he stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, "I am willing, be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him. He stretched out his hand and touched him. I wonder when the last time was that this leper had somebody touch him. Because you weren't supposed to touch a leper. So Jesus kind of not twisted the words, that's a bad phrase. He changed the words just slightly to where it had a different impact, a different meaning, and so he gives an emotional response. "I'm willing, be clean." He was pleased with that response. So sometimes encouragement is something that we feel, like that leper actually feeling a touch. Encouragement, sometimes it's sensed, like Job and his friends sitting and spending a week with him, sharing with him, or waiting to share with him. Sometimes it's heard, like a message from Jesus. Sometimes it's felt, like a leper that hasn't been touched. Sometimes it's a smell. I put sandalwood there. I bought this a collection of beard oils, and I needed something, but I didn't know what. I didn't know what scent I wanted or anything. So here was a little sample pack of all these little beard oils, and I thought, oh, I'll try some of these. And I was going to share with my son. And so, we're opening up, smelling them, and my son sniffed one. He goes, "Ooh, I don't want that." "Really?" And I sniffed it. It was sandalwood. And if you don't know what sandalwood smells like, it's funny because when I smelled it, it brought back memories to Little League Baseball. It smelled just like the oil we'd rub on our gloves. And so I'm going, "Ooh, this smells good." So, one man's trash, I guess. Sometimes encouragement might be a taste. Holiday season, peppermint, cinnamon. Somebody gives you a gift that you enjoy. Pumpkin spice, no. Sometimes we see it like a friend from far away, somebody you haven't seen in a long time, and you're endeared to this person. You enjoyed the time that you've had with them and shared with them, and so now you see them again, and you've renewed, refreshed all of that. It inspires you. Encouragement, it's like in the wintertime you go out and your battery was weak, so your car won't start. You need somebody to start your car. And so somebody comes along that's got a strong battery, and you hook up the jumper cables, and so a strong charged battery will boost the weak battery up so that the car will start. And It's getting ready to get cooler, and so we might see some of this. So. But I thought, what a neat analogy, because that's what encouragement is. So we're sharing our courage with a weaker member, and we're boosting them up and helping them, making them feel better. Questions, thoughts, comments?
Hey, Kenny,
Yeah.
I was reading an article recently talking about what makes therapy effective. And they found out things like, the motivation of the client has a certain percentage, the support group that the client has, a particular method that's used for therapy had a percentage. But the majority of the impact that impacts therapy is 45 to 50% of it had to do with the self of the therapist and how they connected with the client. And so they called it the therapeutic presence. It had nothing to do with like learned skills, had nothing to do with therapy. It had just the presence of the therapist and being kind, compassionate, paying attention, listening, it is just that relational presence is therapeutic.
Yeah.
And translates into what you're saying.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Okay. David Jeremiah closes this chapter with a cute little poem. It's wondrous what a hug can do. A hug can cheer you when you're blue. A hug can say, I love you so, or I sure hate to see you go. A hug is welcome back again. And great to see you. Where have you been? A hug can soothe a small child's pain and bring a rainbow after rain. A hug, there's no doubt about it. We scarcely could survive without it. A hug delights and warms and charms. It must be why God gave us arms. Hugs are great for fathers and mother, sweet for sisters, swell for brothers. And chances are your favorite aunts love them more than potted plants. Kittens crave them, puppies love them. Heads of state are not above them. A hug can break the language barrier and make your travel so much merrier. No need to fret about your store of them. The more you give, the more there's more of them. So stretch out those arms without delay and give someone a big hug today. There you go. Go forth and hug. Thanks for your attention and your comments.
Yeah.